So, our goal today is that we want to take the important information that we've been learning and we want to put it all together into one problem. So, we've been talking about things like finding the x-intercepts, solving quadratics, where is the vertex, does it open up or down, and we want to put it all together into one big piece. So, let's say we're given an equation that says y equals x squared minus 9x plus 20. Okay, and maybe the first thing that we want to find are the x-intercepts. Remember that x-intercepts are also the solutions. So while we have talked about this by using Desmos and graphing it, right, we want to get this whole picture put together. So we know if we are looking at a quadratic, right, our x-intercepts are these locations here and here. Okay, those are also our solutions. And we can get those solutions, we can get those x-intercepts by solving a quadratic. Okay, and we can solve a quadratic by using the quadratic formula. So when we say we want to use the quadratic formula, we've always said that it has to be equal to 0. Well, the other thing to understand is that an x-intercept always has a y value of 0. So when we are talking about finding an x-intercept, we are talking about y equaling 0. So when we take this equation that we were given, we can really plug 0 in for y and solve this using the quadratic formula. So remember, our quadratic formula says x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So the first step that we want to do is we want to identify a, b, and c. Okay, so in this situation, a equals 1. What does b equal? We should have said b equals negative 9, right? Because that has a subtraction sign in front of it. And c equals 20. So when we start plugging this into the quadratic formula, we are going to say x equals, and what is the first number we should be writing down? We should have said positive 9, right? Because the negative of negative 9 is positive 9 plus or minus the square root of negative b squared minus 4 times a is 1 times what? We should have picked 20. All over 2 times 1. Okay, so our next step is to get the number underneath the square root, right? So you're going to pick up your calculator and you're going to take everything that you see underneath the square root and plug it in. So you do that, and then what value do you get? We should have got 1. Okay, so now we have x equals 9 plus or minus the square root of 1 all over 2. So now we want to take the square root of 1. And the square root of 1 is just 1. So now we have x equals 9 plus or minus 1 all over 2. What do we want to do next? We should have selected putting this into 2 separate options, right? We need to calculate both options. So we have 9 plus 1 over 2 and 9 minus 1 over 2. And then what are our final answers? Well, when we go to calculate these, we got a 10 over 2, which is 5, and an 8 over 2, which is 4. So we should have picked answers of 5 and 4. Now, these values are our solutions, but solutions are the same thing as x-intercepts. So when it's asking us to find the x-intercepts, we would say x equals 5 and 4. Okay, now it might ask us to find more than one thing about this quadratic. So it might ask us to not only find the x-intercepts, it might also ask us to find the vertex. So if we are taking this exact same quadratic, y equals x squared minus 9x plus 20, Okay, and if we wanted to find the vertex, remember that vertex is the high point or the low point of this parabola. Would this parabola open up or down? Right, we should have picked up because in this case, A is equal to +1. Okay, so in this case, we know we're finding a minimum. Okay, and we find that vertex by doing -b over 2a and then plugging that value back in, right? And this is also something we were practicing last week. Okay, so to find the vertex, we're going to do x equals -b. So b is -9, so we want +9 over 2 times 1. So that's 9 over 2. And for most of you, I know you prefer this in a decimal format. So for the majority of you, you're going to turn that into a 4.5, which is fine. Okay, what do we want to do next to finish finding the vertex? We should have said that we want to plug this in for both places for x. So we want a 4.5 squared minus 9 times 4.5 plus 20. Again, it's totally fine that you just pick up your calculator and type this in your calculator. Just double check and make sure you're doing it correct. And what value should we get out? When we type this into our calculator, we should get out -0.25. Okay, so that means our y value is -0.25. So for our vertex, we got an x value of 4.5 and we got a y value of -0.25, right? So this would be the answer for our vertex. So let's look at one more. Let's say we have y equals 2x squared plus 8x plus 6. Okay, and let's say we want to find the x-intercepts, and we also want to find the vertex. So we are going to find both of those things. Okay, so to find the x-intercepts, that is the same thing as to find the solution. So what should we do if we want to find the solution? We should have selected that we are plugging in y equals 0 and solving this with the quadratic formula. So we're going to say 0 equals 2x squared plus 8x plus 6. Okay, so we have a equals 2, b equals 8, and c equals 6. So we're going to start plugging this in. X equals -b, which is -8, plus or minus the square root of what? Okay, so we should have picked 8 squared next, minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is 6, all over 2 times 2. Our next step is to put in whatever we have underneath the calculator. Okay, so plug this into your calculator and tell me what you get. We should have got 16. Now we have -8 plus or minus the square root of 16 all over 4. What step do we want to take next? We should have picked simplifying the square root of 16. So now we have -8 plus or minus 4 all over 4. Okay, and then we're going to calculate both options. So we'll have -8 plus 4 over 4 and a -8 minus 4 over 4. So from this information, what are our two answers? So we should have had -4 over 4, which is a -1, and a -12 over 4, which is a -3. So we'll get an x equals -1 and -3. So these two things are making up our x-intercepts. Now for the second piece to find our vertex, what formula do we need to use to find our vertex? We should have picked x equals -b over 2a. So in this case, we're going to say -8 over 2 times 2, right? We already have our a, b, and c over here. Okay, so what is our x value going to equal? Okay, well, we have negative 8 over 4. So negative 8 divided by 4 gives us a negative 2. So our x value should be negative 2. We then need to take this value and plug it in for both of our x's. So we're saying 2 times negative 2 squared plus 8 times negative 2 plus 6. So if we take this information, make sure in your calculator you're putting that negative 2 in parentheses. So 2 parentheses negative 2 squared plus 8 times negative 2 plus 6, and we get out negative 2. So what is our vertex going to be in this situation? We should have picked negative 2, negative 2.